Hi, so my name is Kuljit. I am the project lead at the Open Minds project. We're based online mainly. We're a group of volunteers and we all identify as being members of the LGBTQIA population or community, and we all have South Asian heritage. We've been making spaces for us to connect with other people from the community since about 2019 in London, then online, and now also in Birmingham. So our spaces are really for us to connect with each other, share our stories, usually based around a topic, and we're really there to try and push back against some of the marginalization, so squeezing out that we experience in wider South Asian community spaces, but also just to celebrate our lives and to support each other. So our work really is about how we as members of the LGBTQIA plus community can learn from each other, and within that community we do have our gay, bi and trans men too. So at the moment we don't have specific spaces for men or those who identify as men. We really kind of learn together all in the same space. But I guess the main thing to be clear about is that it is an open and welcoming space. So we don't really, for those who, for example, trans men or people who are considering their gender identity or might be non-binary, we make the space. We don't ask you to disclose where you are at with your journey or your gender identity. And we're hopeful that just making those spaces and making sure that they are non-judgmental and open just helps people feel supported and part of the wider conversation. So when we're thinking about our heritages, it's a very interesting and complicated question, or that's what we found out. So when we started out, we really were about making spaces for people with Punjabi heritage, and that was partly because of the way that the group started out. It started out with that question and that task. But what we realized is actually it's more about the experiences of people who've migrated to the UK either recently or in the past, who have South Asian heritage, because a lot of the issues that affect us as individuals within those communities affect us in a more general sense too. So we're not really about creating barriers or walls between the different South Asian heritages, but we are about trying to recognize the fact that there is some difference, there is some subtle and sometimes big differences between some of the different communities. In saying that, we're also aware of the fact that even if you come from one community, for example, the Punjabi community, there's huge variation within that too. So our spaces will continue to make spaces for people under all of those umbrellas, and it probably will continue to be complicated and a bit confusing, because that's really the reality of our lives living in the UK with brown skin and South Asian heritage, as well as having the LGBTQIA plus identities too. So thinking about what might be missing for all of those who identify as men and have South Asian heritage, I think it's a big question, and a lot of it overlaps with some of the issues that men more generally have in populations too. So thinking specifically about our groups under the LGBTQIA plus identities, there's something about masculinity and how it is performed in the cultures that we may have inherited or been brought up in, and then how we can kind of, if we don't fit that mold, or if we don't want to fit that mold, well, how can we still live our lives as people who identify as men in those spaces? And some of those problems are also problems for men in a more general sense, but I think for us we've also got issues of being excluded, issues of power, issues about shame, and some of that some of the complications of being a man and having a man's body or way of being can be much more concentrated for us in our groups. No, because I think that we, in terms of things that we're missing, or something that's particular for our groups, one is about skin color and racism, and how we experience our brown bodies in the wider world, but also in the LGBTQIA plus spaces. And depending on where you live in the UK, there may be more diversity, less diversity, but it's very much a big issue in terms of how you navigate your skin colour in public, let alone as a man. I think when you look at the intersection between being a man and also racism, then it gets a bit more complicated. So I think chuck in a little bit of shame, taboo, stigma, and then you can see how it can feel like a very heavy burden to carry your body into those environments, into those spaces. So I think in terms of something that's missing, I think probably having some spaces where we can unpick some of these things together, reconstitute them, so put them back together in a way that makes sense for us and that empowers us. So I think ideas around being positive about our bodies, but also how to navigate those pressures which will still come up and still feel good enough, vulnerable enough where we need to be, and also strong enough in a kind of holistic sense, not just like physically strong. Yeah, if that makes any sense. So what would my tips be? I guess I could maybe think about imagining back to when I was younger, and what I would have, what worked for me, but maybe what would have been good for me to know at the time. I think I was quite a sheltered young person who'd grown up in a very specific kind of Punjabi upbringing, which meant I didn't actually know as much about the world as I could have. Hopefully some of that's changed now with resources being available online. But I think there is something important about finding the right kind of knowledge for you. So I think that one thing is, so look for information. So maybe be careful with what information you trust too as well. So I think that if you're read a lot on the internet, but also if you like to read books, read the experiences of other people who've been through similar journeys, and just start educating yourself about what's out there, good and bad. Look for people that can also support you on your journey. So what's in your local area, what's more widely accessible, and try and find something which fits for you for now. I guess maybe then the third tip is to realize that this is very much a journey. It's your own journey, and it will unfold at the kind of rate and so the speed at which it makes sense for your life. So if people give you advice, be mindful of it. It may not be relevant for you now. It might make sense later, or it may not be relevant at all. So look out there for information, connect with other people, but then just kind of be prepared to go on your own journey with things. That's kind of that kind of would have been useful for me probably to know when I was in my younger years. So in terms of what might be missing in terms of emotional support or practical support for those who identify as men and have South Asian heritage, it's probably it's a complicated question, because it depends on where you are and what you have access to. Like, I think comparing a city like London with somewhere much more rural or smaller, it's important to recognize those differences in this country. So I think in terms of what might be missing, I think one of the big things is probably integrated role models. And I know that's not an easy thing to solve, but I think some of us need to be more seen in the wider communities, so that it isn't just such a strange thing for people. Young people need to see that it's okay, and that people can live full and happy lives being under the LGBTQIA plus identities. So I think once our media, our wider communities, once they show us in those spaces, I think that will be a marker of a really big change. Until then, I wonder whether some of the steps towards that is us having more conversations with people from those more mainstream organisations, So people who are connected to our communities but not just thinking about sexuality or gender, because again, I think we need to remind them that we're here, that there's a lot of overlap between what they might be talking about in our own lives, but also there's some unique challenges which we kind of need them to step up to too. And I guess what I'm really talking about is better allyship. So I think that's definitely one thing we could improve on massively. So if you'd like to access our services, you can find out more about us on our website, which is theopenmindsproject.org. On there you'll see our events for the month. You'll also be able to read about some of the events we've done before. And one of the things we're most proud of is you can see some of the work of some of our community members. So little bits of art, poetry, some life stories, and also YouTube videos. We've got a selection of videos with parents, so Desi parents of people, where they just talk through their experiences. So the website is a great resource. On the events page, it links to our Eventbrite page, and that's where you can sign up to our groups. We're also on Instagram and on X, formerly Twitter, so you can follow us there. And if there's any questions, or if you just want to ask for some advice, you're welcome to drop us an email too, and one of the volunteers can reply back to you, even if that's just about finding out a bit more about the groups and things. At the moment, our groups are running in London, Birmingham, and online in different months. So just follow us on Eventbrite and you'll be able to know what's happening. We also have a poetry group on Sundays, which is online, and a book group, which is currently reading queer plays. And as I said, all of that you can find out via our website. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we're doing. And for anyone that's looking to come to one of our spaces, you're very welcome to be there, and we very much look forward to meeting you in one of our groups.